Okay, so I wasn't expecting this to be the second video I made about D&D. And warning, this is a bit more negative than the first video, but I just felt like sharing this little story with all of you. I hope you all understand and can enjoy this anyway. If not, sorry. So, a bit of context. I started DMing at my Avengers League group. I started running effectively the module Dragon Heist Waterdeep and the party consisted of a half-orc barbarian, a half-elf fighter, a water genasi ranger, and then due to the nature of Avengers League, I ended up taking on new players and including a human monk, a a half-orc cleric of Groomish, and as well, I gained two new players at this table. One was a halfling warlock, while the other was apparently a tiefling bard. I tell them both to advance to level 4 since we were starting chapter 3 of Dragon Heist, and I was running it, trying to make it a bit smoother, so I was changing a few rulings of how certain elements of the game worked. But for the most part, I was trying to stay closer to the book because I felt like the book had pretty good ideas of how to run an adventure. So I informed them of how to level themselves up to 4th level. Actually, one character actually decided he wanted to make a brand new character knowing he had level 4, which I found a little strange, but I assume maybe he just had an idea of what he could make if he was level 4. I wasn't sure. He actually rolled for the stats, I believe. Or he claimed he did, but I didn't see him roll anything, which makes me a touch suspicious. But whatever, I wasn't about to just hover over a guy's shoulders while I was trying to get everything else running smoothly. So here's what happens. There's a bit of cleanup from the previous session, which was a few weeks ago to do me having to step out for a week. But I was back and ready, and I had a fun little session with the party describing a scenario dealing with some halflings. And long story short, the city was under the impression that they threatened to turn the halflings into dinner. And I might have been emphasizing it just because there was a fun little Soylent Green reference in there. After, though, the players assured the city representative that their place was a fine, well-respected establishment, the person left and I gave them a chance to introduce themselves, give a short interview almost. And I also gave them both relevant ability checks to show off some of their talent. The warlock showed off some of their magic, while the bard showed off their musical capability. I wasn't too pushing on them to just try and sell their characters yet, because I knew I was going to give them something interesting to work with. Because for those of you who don't know how Chapter 3 of Dragon Heist starts, well, this is your last chance to get out before you get spoiled, but there's a fireball involved, and for once, it's not the player's fault. So I described to them how smoke builds into their newly renovated tavern, and how there's a shuddering explosion, and the windows all shatter. I'm describing. And so, as it happens, I'm giving them an opportunity to start playing. However, I give my first warning flag during the playful banter before the chapter starts. See, there was just a bit of a joke of how we have a new halfling in the party, and people are implying that they turned halflings into food. And one of my players, who's a good player, the barbarian in question, was having a little bit of fun, and I just did feel the need to warn them out of character, hey, I don't want you to actually cause a fight. I don't allow PvP in my games, and I don't allow, like, deliberately causing a problem. I think I mentioned I have a no evil characters rule. I think I said no chaotic. I don't want chaotic evil. And then the player shows me that he's lawful evil, and he has the criminal background. So I tell him, don't cause an issue in the conflict with the party, and remember that just because your character is evil aligned, D&D is a cooperative, keyword, cooperative board game. So you really shouldn't be causing a fight amongst your own players. Trust me, I can throw enough deadly monsters at you that you don't need to fight each other. So as it happens, the fireball goes off, and I decide to keep to the idea of an adrenaline rush, and as well to make sure that everyone gets a turn and not just one person gets to dominate the table. I actually institute an initiative system. I have everyone roll for initiative, and we write down the order. And the players go through describing how they make intentions to either try and investigate or just or to try and disperse some of the civilians who are running about in a panic. And most people are doing that, and they're making checks or just surveying the scenario. The barbarian says he's gonna stand at the door to make sure no one in the chaos tries anything sneaky and tries to get into their tavern. Then it comes to the new player. One of the new players, whose first question is, what can I steal? I try and get him to clarify, reminding him he is in the tavern that the party owns, and he was trying to join said party, and again, they basically had the equivalent of a job interview 5 seconds ago. He still made it clear, and I remember facepalming at the fact that this player's first action of the game is to try and start a conflict. The one I had just told him to do. The one thing I told him not to do. Our barbarian, whom I had been DMing for since I started running this module as a campaign, called him out, and I was very annoyed. So I decided I was going to just teach him a quick lesson of that I didn't allow this at all, and I skipped over his turn. The session continued, but I ended up going off script. So if you have played Dragon Heist, this is going to sound out of sequence. That's why, because I've played this module before and wasn't a fan with how railroady it felt. So, the party manages to find the source of the fireball. They figure out that it must have been launched from a rooftop. And the sorcerer using detect magic, I described them looking up and seeing a magical entity run away from the rooftop. Given this, the rogue and the monk, 2 classes known for being able to move quickly, managed to get on top of the roof and follow in pursuit. So, I get another warning sign about that guy as it goes on. I then divide the initiative into pursuers and investigators, just because the party was effectively splitting up into 2 equal groups. One staying near the tavern and on the street where the fireball went off, and one evading the law to try and chase down the criminal themselves. And I do inform them that from here on, they're gonna have to make stealth checks because the guard is coming. Because, a fireball just went off. The problem comes, though, that guy asked a question, suggesting that he wanted to, and I quote, boil a guard. And I realized that this guy was definitely a murder hobo who wanted to use heat metal to kill a guard. A guard, mind you, that is by definition just doing its job. The guards were not aggressive or violent towards the party by any means. all they were doing in the game was making sure no one came or left. Now, the party did try a few tricks to get past them, one of which included trying to use an invisibility spell in the open, which was immediately counterspelled. But the sorcerer was able to effectively make a successful deception check to save face. So I didn't have any negative consequences for that action. And the party was getting a bit more annoyed that the only contributions that this character seemed intent on making was seemingly to try and cause a conflict, and he only ever partook in activities because I specifically called him out. When I wasn't doing that, he seemed to be more interested in chatting amongst themselves. Now, I understand that sometimes some people just get an idea and they just want to chit-chat, and I can be guilty of that myself. But the thing is, I never do that if there's an intense scene going on, which is what this session was. And better off, I definitely don't need to be called out by the DM specifically because I'm too busy talking to someone else. I have a bit more respect for other DMs than that. So, the rogue and the monk, meanwhile, are working hard to just keep following this culprit. They just keep using their speed, considering how both a monk can use Step of the Wind, while a rogue can use their cunning action to dash, to effectively run at full tilt. I did give them options to either run at full tilt but risk disadvantage on the stealth check, or to run a bit slower but they'd have an easier time hiding. The rogue chose to double down on speed because they were already pretty good at hiding. This wasn't helped by the fact that I might have given them a pretty strong item for sneaking, which came in handy when I rolled a perception check from a Griffin guard with disadvantage, and the result was a natural 2 or a natural 20. So, the pursuit continued on for a while, and while the pursuants were getting ready to ask questions to locals and were basically gathering information and utilizing the clout they had gathered by doing various faction missions, they managed to convince the guard that they are trustworthy and help with the investigation. Meanwhile, the rogue specifically got an idea. They asked me if they could use their cunning action to dash, their movement to move at full closeness, get within 30 feet of the runner, and then use their short bow to shoot in the leg to stop it from running. I let the rogue know that this wasn't going to be an easy shot, and since it was a called shot on a moving target, they could expect a much higher AC. I tell them, you can go for it, but you better roll high. That's when the rogue makes their roll and rolls a natural 20 to hit. I paused for a moment, thinking, because I knew that if this happened, the module would be completely different. You might remember that if you've played this game, that usually there's no means to actually catch the one who threw the fireball. They're supposed to get away and make it back to the house. And then you're supposed to find out, based off of witnesses, to get a hint that leads you to a temple, and that gives you a device to find the pursuer later. I decided not to do that, and I decided that it hit. So the entity falls off the roof. I let the one on the ground, which happened to be that guy, know that he hears a sound similar to a bunch of sticks falling onto the ground. The players were a bit confused, but entranced. The monk used her slow fall to get down to the ground, while the rogue simply used a rope while I went back to the investigators. They, meanwhile, met a cleric who the party had previously befriended, who was helping out with the investigation by casting Speak with Dead. I informed the players that the cleric would charge, for a donation of 25 GP, would be willing to cast Speak with Dead as many times as the party wanted, letting them know that once cast on a single target, the body could not be retargeted by the same spell again for a week. The party was fine with this and just decided that all that matters was that they made their information count. I also was being a bit more generous with the bodies and let them kind of give away a bit more information based off what the module said, even if it wasn't specifically what the party asked for. I just wanted the party to feel like they were getting their actual money's worth for casting Speak with Dead, since technically they'd have to wait a whole week to try and ask them again. Now, I'm going to admit, while trying to give the players more agency and chasing down the guilty party, I ended up confusing a detail or two. But I figured that if I just explained that the party would be pretty understanding, and they more appreciated just this system where they actually got to chase the thing as opposed to just having to figure it out in the aftermath, since just having to talk through a bunch of dialogue isn't a terrible way to spend a session, but if you don't know what to ask, then you're kind of confused, and that was the problem I had with how the module was written. When I played it, I was playing a fighter who had high perception, so he wasn't exactly a good talker, but I figured that if I learned something was in the sewers, I could use that. I could go into the sewers, use my perception to hear, I don't know, the sounds of footsteps or splashing water, and give chase. This never happened. I effectively run around in the sewers for several hours to no avail. The DM wasn't exactly good at improvising because the module doesn't give you any option to actually find the culprit. You're just supposed to pick it up after the fact and figure it out from there. Anyways, things go on pretty well, and the party through proxy all learned that the thing they were chasing is a Nimblewright, an entity made of wood. And the rogue tries asking it questions, including literally asking if it lobbed the fireball. I decide the Nimblewright can't really talk, but it can nod, it can shake its head, it can make weird creaking noises. But it also tries to lie, which the player got another natural 20 for their insight check. So I very quietly whisper, "He's lying." Unimpressed, the rogue threatens to light them on fire. And then it brings up the question, can the rogue actually make a fire? I mentioned that in their adventuring gear, they probably have a flint or tinder, some matches, if they remember to grab their gear like that in hot pursuit. Sort of leaving it up in the air if they actually had it, because I felt like that was up for the players to decide if that was something they found essential. However, I felt like throwing the bard a bone and suggested that maybe there would be someone with them in the party who can use magic to, I don't know, create some fire. I had to actually yell this in the player's direction because he wasn't interested in any of the story beats. Apparently, if he couldn't fight, he wasn't interested in any part of the game. Reminder that this is what cemented me that guy had a strong case of murder hobo syndrome. The problem is he instead of just using, say, prestidigitation or minor illusion to create a little spark of flame to intimidate it, he decided the best scenario would be to threaten to kill it. Keep in mind, to get to this point, he had cast invisibility, so the rest of the party didn't actually know he was there. So he threatened the Nimblewright, and I decided that the Nimblewright, hearing a voice, and being what it was, a trained assassin, a hidden blade pops out of its elbow and tries to stab him with it. I make a reflex save. He asks for advantage for this save because he's invisible. I tell him that doesn't work because he literally informed his location to the Nimblewright when he whispered in its ear. So he takes a hit. It wasn't much. It was just 1d4 piercing plus dex. And I rolled a 1 on the d4, so in all, 5 damage isn't really going to leave a level 4 that sore. I played level 4 characters, and they took much more damage before it became worrisome. However, the bard decided that this called for an extreme retaliation, and he cast Hellish Rebuke, which made me assume that he assumed that the wooden thing was made of fire. And when I asked him to clarify that this was a damaging fire spell, he said, "Well, yeah, 'cause it attacked me." The party wasn't actually all that impressed with it. One of the rogue, who had worked so hard to actually chase and interrogate, said, "Hey, come on, don't kill it." But that was his excuse. He took a tiny bit of damage, therefore he should be allowed to kill it. I felt myself being very drained, and I didn't want a party versus party conflict. And I was worried that if anyone tried confronting him on this, he would try and turn this into a PvP session, despite the fact that I made it clear it wasn't allowed. Thankfully, the Nimblewright is actually a bit resilient to magic and has high dex. And since he was level 4, he didn't seem to have the highest DC, and I managed to make the save without too much of an issue. So I described that the Nimblewright takes a bit of damage on the back of its head, and the top of its head has been scorched. The monkeys actually seems to be very distraught by this, because seeing the picture, they actually apparently were quite fond of the hat. I do let them know that if you had access to a mending spell, the hat could be repaired, but as it is, it had some scorch marks, and the feather upon the Nimblewright's cap was ruined. I may as well note out that this was the last time the bard actually showed any interest in participating with the story, and I was very annoyed with this. See, I was very excited at learning that I might have a bard in the party, because this Dragon's Heist has plenty of opportunities for social interactions, and a bard is a more utilitous class that is good with NPC interaction at times, or if needed can help a party that's lacking a certain amount of, well, gumption to boost their stats in ways that are often helpful. I remember I enjoyed swapping from a bard to a cleric, and aside from a slight drop in damage, which didn't matter because we didn't face all that much combat in the next session, I was very gladly enjoying the high amount of skill utilities, not to mention just the sheer amount of spells that you have access when you are a bard. Unfortunately, this bard seemed more interested in just finding means to work around and have a DPS cannon. And that was very much an annoying factor for me, because Dragon's Heist isn't really meant to be a hard combat campaign. So, why did I make this video? Well, I mostly just wanted to get some feelings off my mind and just talk for a bit. And I hope people understand that I'm not opposed to people playing a different morally aligned character, but I have seen characters that seem to have no real purpose aside from they want to rack up a body count. Sometimes they're from 3.5 version, or they're more Pathfinder oriented, and their main enjoyment is from that optimal build that likes to rack up the kills. They want to be the most damaging character. And sometimes that's okay. You can enjoy a level of combat if you find if you find a certain combination of powers and abilities and stat buffs that just give you the most optimal means of taking out enemies. And there are DMs who love to be that sort of war game style setting. But you also have to be receptive to other players, and the main problem I have is that plenty of players out there will instead decide that because I'm the most damaging, I have the best reason to lead, or I should just be allowed to do whatever I want because I can easily roll over everyone else. And effectively, it becomes almost a state of bullying where you can't really call the player out because if you call them out in character, they'll just demand you fight them, and you're not going to win because they min-max themselves to do maximum damage, and you're just going to lose. I remember having a scenario where I was trying to beg and plead for a character to not cause a fight with everything they did. This character, by the way, was insistent on destroying the town we were charged with protection in the mission. But they said, no, it's fine, it's what my character would do. And I said, well then you can't say your character's chaotic good, because a good person doesn't want to mass murder people. Their response? No, I'm good aligned because I think I'm good. That's not what a good person says. That's what a villain says. That's what a villain says on top of their monologue. That's something that Thanos would pull out of their ass. Oh, well, there goes my monetization.